What if the richest country on earth was quietly building the largest 10 cities in its own history? Not in a war zone, not after a natural disaster. In Los Angeles, in New York, in the shadow of the world's most valuable tech companies. Stay with me for the next few minutes because if you've ever believed the American dream was simply sleeping, wait until you see what it actually looks like when it wakes up on concrete. Hit subscribe before we go further because where this story ends will change how you see every skyline you've ever admired. Here's the promise I'm making you right now. By the end of this journey, you'll understand exactly why a nation producing $27 trillion a year cannot house its own people, and what it would actually cost to fix it. That number is coming. But first, you need to see the scale of what we're dealing with. In 2024 alone, homelessness in the United States surged by 18%, pushing the total to nearly 800,000 people living without a permanent home. That's a record. The coldest, most glacial record this country has set in modern history. And by April 2025, when these very images were being filmed, the number had climbed even further, 771,148 Americans without stable housing. Let that sink in. That's more people than live in entire small states. This isn't a footnote, it's a nationwide fracture. But the fracture doesn't look the same everywhere. To understand it, we have to walk through 5 cities where the crisis has become impossible to hide. We start where the crisis feels most theatrical, Los Angeles. Walk through Skid Row and it hits you like a physical blow. Rows of tents, tarps strung between shopping carts, fragments of broken lives murmuring in the air. Los Angeles County alone holds an enormous share of California's homeless population, and California represents nearly half the national total. Why here? Because the average studio apartment rents for $2,500 a month, while wages have barely moved. Add a severe shortage of affordable housing, and you have a recipe for disaster. Mental illness and addiction deepen the wound. Social workers describe a revolving door between treatment centers and the street. Temporary housing programs exist, new shelters open, but the scale of the crisis dwarfs every effort thrown at it. Film your way across the city, and you'll catch luxury condos rising 2 blocks from makeshift camps, a brutal contrast that captures a widening gap no city planner seems able to close. Los Angeles may still be the city of dreams. For thousands, that dream now ends in a sleeping bag under a freeway overpass. But if you think that's grim, wait until winter hits New York. Here, the crisis wears a different face. Biting cold, suffocating density, and a cost of living that shows no mercy. By 2025, New York holds the unwanted title of the second highest homeless population in the country. Thousands crowd into shelters, sleep in subway stations, or shelter in Penn Station's corridors once night falls. Support systems exist, shelters, food banks, outreach teams, but they're running on empty. Even a modest apartment in Brooklyn can cost more than $3,000 a month, while wages for low-skill jobs stay frozen in place. One missed paycheck here can unravel an entire life, and in a system this complex and unequal, climbing back out is brutally hard. Mental health struggles, often overlooked or mistreated, make the fall steeper. Many of the people you'd see on these streets are cut off from care entirely, whether by cost or by bureaucracy. And here's the paradox that defines New York. It's a city built on the promise of opportunity, yet the rungs on its ladder are spaced too far apart for most hands to reach. Affordable housing projects do break ground, but far too slowly to slow the tide. This is a city that never sleeps, except for those who have nowhere left to sleep but the pavement. Now travel west, to a place that should, in theory, have solved this already: San Francisco. Walk into the Tenderloin or the Mission District and the contrast is staggering. Sidewalks lined with tents and cardboard sit just blocks from skyscrapers housing the titans of the tech industry. San Francisco now records one of the highest per capita homelessness rates in the entire country. The reason is brutally simple. The tech boom sent rents into orbit. A basic one-bedroom apartment averages $3,500 a month. Long-time, low-income residents get pushed out, and new construction can't keep pace. But housing costs are only half the story. Addiction is everywhere here. Sidewalks littered with needles reflect a drug crisis that leaves people unable to hold a job or a lease. Mental health services technically exist, but they're overwhelmed. One social worker described wait lists stretching for months. This is a city that prides itself on being progressive, yet it's deeply divided. Some push for more shelters, others want encampments cleared entirely. While the debate rages on, solutions stall. San Francisco, the global capital of innovation, seems strangely unable to innovate its way out of a human tragedy unfolding on its own sidewalks. And when the fog rolls over the bay, It almost feels like a metaphor for how blurry the answers have become. Now, here's where the story finally shifts, because not every city is losing this fight. Houston, Texas tells a different kind of story, one of real progress, though the battle is far from over. Houston still sits in the nation's top 5 for total homeless population, yet it has been praised for cutting that number significantly over the last decade. Walk through downtown and you'll see fewer tents than in Los Angeles or San Francisco, though they're still there, often tucked beneath highway overpasses or on vacant lots. The turnaround comes from one clear strategy: housing first. Get people into a home before tackling addiction or unemployment. And it's working. Thousands of people have been rehoused since 2011. But Houston is vast, and urban sprawl means poverty is spread thin and wide. An apartment here might run $1,200 a month, still a heavy burden on minimum wage. Swings in the oil industry only add to the instability, leaving many workers financially exposed. Mental health services are expanding, but too slowly. Some people who finally get housed end up back on the street simply because the follow-up support runs out. Houston proves progress is possible. It also proves that nothing here is permanent, especially across a city this enormous. If you thought Silicon Valley's billions would insulate it from all this, San Jose is about to prove you wrong. With 363 homeless individuals per 100,000 residents, San Jose posts the 4th highest rate in the entire country. Encampments stretch along creeks and freeways, sometimes just steps from homes worth millions of dollars. The math is brutal. Median rent tops $3,000 a month, inflated by concentrated tech wealth, while service workers, retirees, and families watch stable housing become a mirage. Here you'll find entire families living out of RVs, children doing homework by flashlight because there's no electricity, no space, no stability. Santa Clara County estimates that half its homeless population struggles with mental illness or addiction, most of it untreated. The city is responding with tiny house villages and emergency shelters, but it's a single drop in an ocean of need. Tech giants post record profits while tent cities grow at their doorstep. San Jose is California's distorted mirror. Extreme wealth and deep poverty standing side by side. So why, after everything you've just seen, hasn't America solved this? The answer starts with a number that should stop you cold. In 2023, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition revealed a shortage of 7.3 million affordable rental units for the poorest households in the country. Consider Los Angeles, where the 2025 median rent hit $2,779, or New York, where it reached $3,500. A full-time worker earning minimum wage brings home roughly $1,500 a month. Do the math. Housing has become a luxury item. Developers keep building luxury condos because they're simply more profitable, while public housing funding, already gutted since the 1990s, barely covers 1.1 million units nationwide for a population that keeps growing. In San Francisco, vacant lots meant for low-income housing sit frozen in bureaucratic limbo, while families sleep in their cars just yards away. Evictions, meanwhile, are exploding. Over 3.6 million filings in 2022 alone, and likely more since. But this isn't just about housing. It's about a widening chasm of inequality. America's GDP surpassed $27 trillion in 2024. And yet, according to the Federal Reserve, the poorest 50% of the population owns just 2.6% of the nation's wealth. In Silicon Valley, an engineer might earn $1,200 a day, while the janitor cleaning his building earns $30,000 a year and shares a bedroom with a roommate. This gap has been widening since the early 2000s. The wealthiest 1% now controls 32% of national wealth. Jobs exist, sure, but they split into two extremes: highly skilled or badly paid, with almost nothing holding the middle together. There are baristas in San Jose working 60-hour weeks who still can't afford a bed of their own. This economic boom simply isn't reaching everyone. And then there's the policy failure sitting quietly behind all of it. The Department of Housing and Urban Development's 2025 budget sits at $70 billion, far short of the $200 billion experts say is actually required to end homelessness nationwide. Houston managed to cut its homeless population by 63% since 2011, using $100 million coordinated dollars. But nationally, funding is scattered. $3 billion here, $5 billion there, swallowed by layers of bureaucracy. And in the meantime, some cities have chosen the simplest option of all: banning encampments outright, pushing people out of sight but never out of hardship. Now, here's where the story gets even darker, because housing is only one half of this crisis. The other half lives inside the human mind. Mental illness and addiction are often two sides of the same coin. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, nearly 25% of homeless adults, roughly 192,000 people, live with serious mental health disorders. Another 38% battle active addiction. In Los Angeles, people cycle endlessly between jail cells and sidewalks simply because treatment beds don't exist. California spends an average of $157 per resident on mental health care, less than half of what New York spends at $300. Treatment exists on paper. Accessing it is another story entirely. Waitlists stretch up to 6 months, and available beds are scarce. Without a baseline of stability, recovery becomes close to impossible. Social safety nets, meanwhile, have quietly collapsed. In 2022, temporary assistance for needy families reached only 21% of eligible households, compared to 68% back in 1996. Budget priorities shifted toward disability benefits instead, but even that path is an obstacle course. Approval takes an average of 7 months, and 40% of food assistance applications get rejected outright. The maximum benefit, $280 a month, doesn't even cover half a month's rent. This is a system built to filter people out, not bring them in. But don't look away yet, because there is a government response, however uneven it may be. Federal programs like the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit injected $12 billion into affordable housing in 2024 alone, building or preserving 100,000 units. Some cities are pushing harder. Los Angeles approved a $1.2 billion bond to build 10,000 units of social housing by 2026. Houston continues expanding its Housing First model, having rehoused 25,000 people since 2011, backed by $50 million in annual federal funding through HUD. Section 8 vouchers currently support 2.3 million households, even though roughly 100 million people would qualify. Most are left waiting. SAMHSA's funding rose to $6.5 billion in 2025, a 10% increase from 2023, fueling mobile clinics and additional detox beds. San Francisco now runs 20 mobile crisis vans offering on-the-spot psychological support. A $500 million workforce fund trains 50,000 low-income people annually, everything from carpentry in Houston to coding in San Jose. And expanded tax credits under recent policy pulled 5 million people out of poverty in 2023 alone. Progress, yes, but nowhere near enough to offset the actual cost of living, especially housing. And we can't ignore the shadow cast by earlier policy decisions. The 2017 tax overhaul slashed the corporate tax rate from 35% down to 21%, adding, according to Treasury estimates, $1.5 trillion to GDP. Stock markets surged, with the Dow Jones eventually hitting 45,000 points. But that boom wasn't shared equally. While the middle class received roughly $1,000 in annual tax relief, the wealthiest 1% pocketed up to $50,000 each. The wealth gap widened further. Construction permits rose 15%, but 80% of that new construction went to luxury housing. The result? Cities like Los Angeles now watch $5 million condos rise directly beside tent encampments. HUD's real budget dropped 16%, and social housing units fell from 1.2 million to 1.1 million. Tariffs pushed material costs up 20%, making affordable projects nearly impossible to greenlight. On the job side, 7 million positions were created through 2020, but mostly at the bottom of the pay scale. 40% of workers earn less than $15 an hour. Economic growth soared while homelessness exploded right alongside it. When policy prioritizes markets over safety nets, it's always the most vulnerable who are left exposed. So here's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all these numbers. The safety net that's supposed to catch people before they fall now looks more like a torn fishing net. Temporary assistance for needy families theoretically offers cash support to the poorest households. In practice, it barely functions. Reaching only 21% of eligible families versus 68% in 1996 means millions wait for help that averages less than $500 a month in states like Texas. In Houston, people file applications, wait months, and receive nothing, while rent piles up and eviction notices arrive. Food assistance feeds 41 million Americans, but the maximum benefit, $281 a month, doesn't cover even half of a $1,200 rent. It becomes a choice between eating and staying housed. Disability benefits are meant to be a last resort. For many, they're simply a mirage. 40% of claims get denied, with an average wait of 7 months. In San Francisco, people in wheelchairs, psychologically fragile, sleep on sidewalks while paperwork piles up in some office. Total welfare spending across every program combined sits around $50 billion, compared to over $1 trillion in tax cuts since 2017. This was never a question of resources, it's a question of priorities. Fund the wealthiest or fund the most desperate. Too often, the desperate lose. Charities are stepping into the gap left behind. In Los Angeles, churches distribute up to 1,000 meals a day. But charity isn't policy, it's triage. Real social support could be a bridge back to stability. If the budget doubled to $100 billion and the process were simplified, families could stay housed instead of being pushed into the street. So how do you actually fix something this deep? Not with band-aids, with structural change. Picture entire neighborhoods of sustainable, affordable homes, solar-powered, built from recycled modular materials. In Austin, this isn't a fantasy, it's already happening. Community First Village houses 500 people in $40,000 homes, funded through donations and grants. Multiply that model across 100 cities, and you could lift 50,000 people off the street for roughly $2 billion a year, a fraction of the $700 billion military budget. Cities like San Jose sit on 1,200 acres of unused public land. Convert that into green villages with shared gardens, job centers, and health clinics. Add tax incentives for low-profit developers, offer 30% tax credits, and watch the construction cranes move in. An effective system also has to heal, not just house. Imagine mental health clinics as easy to walk into as a flu shot clinic. Right now, only 1 in 3 people with severe mental illness receives any treatment at all. With $6.5 billion, you could create 10,000 specialized treatment beds and hire 5,000 counselors. Raising social support coverage from 21% to 50% would cost $20 billion and could lift 10 million people out of poverty. Cutting the disability wait time from 7 months to 2 wouldn't just save time, it would save lives. A simple $500 monthly support payment to prevent an eviction costs 100 times less than housing that same person in an emergency shelter later. Government alone can't solve this. The private sector has to step in too. Imagine Amazon or Google funding 1,000 tiny homes in San Francisco, a mere $40 million, a rounding error against their fortunes. In New York, 15% of the housing stock sits vacant. With the right tax incentives, those units could open to homeless residents tomorrow. Organizations like Habitat for Humanity could triple their output with expanded private donations, jumping from 10,000 to 30,000 homes built per year. In San Diego, a public-private partnership has already delivered 200 new homes. Scale that nationally, and you have the beginning of a real movement. And here's the part no statistic can fully capture. This isn't politics, it's human. Making this journey meant standing face-to-face with mothers holding their children close in San Diego, and veterans shivering on the streets of Houston. One layoff, one unexpected bill. That's all it takes for anyone's life to tip over. Walking through Los Angeles means watching tents pitched in the shadow of glass towers. Billionaires launching rockets while families sleep on cardboard a few miles away. This isn't only the government's failure, it's ours too. Yours, mine, the shopkeeper down the street. One man in New York put it simply. He didn't want pity, just a little dignity. And that, unlike a $200 billion budget gap, is something every single one of us can actually give. So where does that leave us? Homelessness in America is a deep, sprawling crisis that demands bold, coordinated action. More housing, real access to care, genuine economic opportunity. Those are the pillars of a fairer country. And as this story comes to a close, I'm left with two feelings that refuse to cancel each other out. Frustration that in 2025 we're still setting records for human suffering, and stubborn hope that the solutions already exist, if we're brave enough to actually use them. So tell me, do you think America can reverse this trend? Or are we trapped in a cycle with no way out? Drop your answer in the comments, I'll be reading every single one, and if this story moved you, stay right here for the next investigation, because what we uncovered next is even harder to look away from.